It's game week 29 in the Premier League this weekend, and with just 5 points separating 6 teams from Chelsea in 4th down to Bournemouth in 9th, the race for European football next season is still too close to call. This is the predictions shown. With the Carabao Cup Final this weekend, we've got 8 Premier League fixtures to take a look at. All the stories, all the talking points around each game, and we'll give our predictions as well. Let's get stuck in. No early kick-off in the Premier League this weekend, so we're straight into the 3 o'clocks, and first up we've got Everton against West Ham at Goodison Park. So we've got 2 managers here who were both appointed at roughly the same time. David Moyes coming in to take over from Sean Dyche in that second week of January, and Graham Potter coming in to take over Julen Lopetegui. And both managers, in different ways, have already had an impact on their teams, haven't they? I mean, for David Moyes, the improvement has been both obvious and immediate, hasn't it? He came into a team that were really struggling down the foot of the table. You know, struggling in terms of points, obviously. They looked like a real contender for relegation under Sean Dyche. But I think in terms of goals as well, that was the main sort of concern for Evertonians, wasn't it? That they just didn't look a threat going forward at all. But in just 9 Premier League games under David Moyes, Everton have scored more than they did in 20 under Sean Dyche. Not only that, Everton are on an 8-game unbeaten run under David Moyes, which has earned him February's Manager of the Month award. For Graham Potter, it's not been quite as straightforward. The problems that he inherited from Julen Lopetegui were mostly concentrated down the other end of the pitch, and he has made a difference. In the 8 games before Potter arrived, West Ham conceded 21 goals. In the 8 games since he's arrived, they've conceded just 9. And they've picked up some very impressive results on the way, haven't they? Not just beating Arsenal, of course, but they beat Fulham. They get a good point on the road against Villa as well. I thought they were quite unlucky in Monday Night Football this week against Newcastle. And he's certainly had an impact in that defence, hasn't he? I mean, there's still some issues in attack, of course. No Michail Antonio after that freak car crash injury. You know, being without your main centre-forward for a big part of the season is always going to be very difficult. And they're now having to rotate Bowen and Kudus up there out of position. It's always going to have an impact on your ability to score and break teams down. So I think it's fair to say that both managers have had a really positive impact since going into the new clubs, and actually the only blot on their record might be the fact that they went out of the FA Cup so early. Everton at home to Bournemouth and West Ham away to Aston Villa. And now, really, you know, with both sides sat in 15th and 16th respectively, they're safe from relegation. They're not going to challenge the top half. There's not really an awful lot left for either side to fight for this season. Which, for both managers, I guess, means that with 10 games left of the season to run, they're now just focusing on assessing their squads, seeing what, you know, gaps they have in the team, maybe where they'll need to improve in the summer, maybe what players they're looking to move on, what players they're able to keep. And for David Moyes, I guess it remains to be seen what happens in the summer, because there's no indication yet that either the club or the manager necessarily see this as a long-term arrangement. You know, is David Moyes likely to be Everton manager in 3-5 years? You know, they're going into this new stadium, this new era at Bramley Moor. I'm sure Evertonians have been hungry for a young, sort of forward-thinking manager that can really push them on and maybe implement a style of play similar to what Graham Potter, I guess, plans to do at West Ham, but similar to what we've seen Unai Emery do at Aston Villa. Certainly what we've seen Fabian Herzler do at Brighton, Andoni Iraola at Bournemouth. Those are the sorts of managers, I'm sure, that Everton would like to be approaching. Maybe not those exact managers, but maybe managers of that ilk in Europe. Someone like that who can come in and reshape how Everton look and feel. So it'll be really interesting to see what this next phase of Everton looks like in their new stadium. You know, is David Moyes a part of that? I guess we'll see. Time will tell. But coming back to this weekend's game, I just can't see past a draw. And the reason I say that is because Everton are the Premier League's draw specialists. No team in the league has drawn more games than Everton. In fact, they've drawn 4 out of their last 5 league games. And I'm not convinced of these two going forward. I think in attack, they're both still a little bit light. And defensively, they can be fine. You know, they can hold a shape. They're very well organised. As managers, they've got a track record of producing robust and resilient defences as well. But I don't think we're going to see too many goals in this one. I'll say that. And I think 1-1, maybe 0-0. It's got that written all over it. So I'm going to go for West Ham to nick a point, and it's going to be Everton 1, West Ham 1. Let me know what you think. Have I got this completely wrong? Is it going to be a 3-all, a 4-3, a 7-goal thriller? Let me know. So next up, another Saturday 3 o'clock game, and this one's got huge significance at both ends of the table. It's Ipswich Town against Nottingham Forest at Portman Road. Now, Ipswich are coming into this one off the back of 7 defeats in their last 8 Premier League games. In fact, the only game they pick a point up in is that trip to Villa Park last month, where they were down to 10 men early in the first half, and they played really well. I thought they were alright in that game. But since then, they've really struggled. Admittedly, the last few games have only been narrow defeats for Ipswich, and one of those, funnily enough, was against Nottingham Forest in the Cup, where they go out on penalties. And I think a defeat here for Ipswich could pretty much seal their return to the Championship, you'd have to say, especially with Wolves playing Southampton in another Saturday 3 o'clock game, which we'll be coming to in a moment. If Ipswich were to get a win here, and results were to go their way elsewhere, then they could be as little as 3 points behind Wolves in that relegation battle. So that feels like it's doable, isn't it? It feels like the race would be back on. But if results don't go their way and they get a beating here, then they could be as much as 9 points off Wolves and with a worse goal difference. And that might just be decisive in the relegation battle, you'd have to say. And equally, I think this is a very big game for Nottingham Forest, especially with Newcastle playing in the Carabao Cup Final this weekend. There's an opportunity here for Forest to put maybe a 7-point gap between them and the teams chasing them in those Champions League places. So it's a really big opportunity for Forest. And look, I got some criticism from Forest fans last week because I dared to say that Manchester City might nick that one, and it was a great result for Forest, I think. But the performances from Forest recently haven't been as good. Their form undeniably has dipped from the immense record that we saw before Christmas. That they have just struggled a little bit recently. And although it was a great result against Manchester City, I'm not sure that it was a great performance. You know, it was a really gritty performance with very few chances in the game, and ultimately it's a mistake that gets them the win. So look, no knocking Forest at all. I think they've been terrific this season, and I hope they get Champions League football. However, I think this one's going to be a very tough game, a very tight game, similar to the one that we saw in the Cup between these two. And Portman Road's a difficult place to go. I think they'll be really up for this one, but I am just going to back Forest. So I wouldn't rule out Ipswich getting something here. Maybe even a win. It could go either way, but I am going to go with a Forest win. So I'm going to go for Ipswich Town 1, Forest 2. Just about. I think it might even be just 1-0 actually. I don't think there's going to be many goals in this one. Probably not one for the purists again. Let me know in the comments what you think. Have I got this massively wrong? I'm sure I'll get criticism from Forest fans either way. Next up, another Saturday 3 o'clock game, and another one that's going to have massive consequences in that race for Champions League football. It's Manchester City, the champions, at home against Brighton and Hove Albion. Brighton have been unbelievable recently, haven't they? I mean, since that 7-0 hammering that they took at the City ground from Nottingham Forest, they've won 6 games straight. And it's taken them up to 7th, just 1 point off those Champions League places. And if they were to come to the Etihad and win, it would take them level on points with Chelsea in 4th, who then have to go to the Emirates on Sunday. And who would bet against that, looking at Brighton's recent form, especially looking at City's recent form? I mean, in their last 9 games, they've won 4 and lost 5, so very up and down. I thought City were really poor against Nottingham Forest last week. I mean, it was a poor game all round, and Forest defended very well, but I think City were limited to hardly any chances in the game, and ultimately they needed a very good save from Ederson to keep them in the game, and then Ederson makes a howler to lose them the game. So I'm sure they still will qualify for the Champions League, but it's going to be a rough ride between now and the end of the season, I'm sure, and all their efforts are going to be focused on the FA Cup. They've got a tough tie coming up in that one after the international break, but they really do need to start finding, getting up through the gears again, getting back to some level of consistency, and they've just not had that in recent months. It's been very tough for Manchester City, and I think this one is going to be an equally difficult game. But I don't think I can call an outright winner in this one. I still respect Manchester City as a very good team. They've got some phenomenal players, Haaland, Diaz, Marmoush, some players that I really rate, and I think they've still got the ability to win big games, and I'm sure they'll find a bit more consistency before the end of the season. And look, Brighton are on this amazing run. I think if they finish in Europe this season, it's still a very good season for them. I'd love them to make the Champions League. I'd love Bournemouth to make the Champions League. I'd love Forest to make the Champions League. I'd love to get some interlopers into that top 5 this season, especially with the extra Champions League place. But I'm yet to be convinced that Brighton are going to do it. I think they'd have to come to a place like this and get a big win. And look, I wouldn't look past them at all. I think Brighton absolutely have the ability to come and beat City here, the way City have been playing recently. But I'm going to back the draw. I'm going to sit on the fence and I'm going to go for a draw. I'm going to go for Manchester City. I'm going to go Desmond. Manchester City 2, Brighton and Hove Albion 2. Let me know in the comments what you think. On to another big Saturday 3 o'clock game. This time it's back to the foot of the table. Southampton against Wolves at St Mary's. Southampton put in a very spirited performance at Anfield last week, and I thought they were full value for the lead at half-time. However, I think for the rest of this season, it's fair to say they're playing for pride, and everyone's just waiting for the relegation to be confirmed. They're currently sat on 9 points at the bottom of the Premier League, and that's 2 shy of the lowest ever total by any Premier League side, which was Derby County's 11 points in the 2007-2008 season. So Southampton need a win or 3 draws between now and the end of the season to avoid that humiliation, and I'm not sure they're going to get either here against Wolves. Wolves come into this one with a 6-point cushion on Ipswich Town in that battle against relegation, and I've got to say, they're looking quite comfortable. They picked up some big wins last month, unexpected wins against very good teams, away at Bournemouth, at home to Villa, and then they followed that up last week with a point against Everton, and I think they're pretty much safe now, Wolves. I've got to say, I don't see that gap being closed anytime soon. And even without their suspended talisman, Matheus Cunha, for this one, I still expect to get the job done against Southampton. So I'm going to go for quite a comfortable Wolves win. I'm going to go for Southampton 1, Wolves 3. Let me know in the comments what you think. On to Saturday's 5:30 late kickoff, and again another game with consequences in that battle for European places. It's Bournemouth against Brentford from the Vitality Stadium. I've got to say, I'm a little bit disappointed in Bournemouth. Anyone who's watched this channel will tell you I absolutely love Andoni Iraola, and I've massively praised Bournemouth over the last 3 or 4 months. I think they've been phenomenal, massively playing out the skin, but really deserving of the position that they're in. I think there's a lot of underrated players in that Bournemouth squad. They went unbeaten from the end of November to the end of January. A really, really long run in the Premier League where they did terrifically well, got themselves in the shout, maybe even for the Champions League places. They've just had a really tough time of it in the last month, haven't they? I mean, they lose back-to-back, firstly at home to Wolves, that was a bad one, and then they lose with the last kick of the game straight after that at Brighton, which I'm sure was a very bitter pill to swallow. And then, last week they're 2-0 up at Spurs and look like they're coasting, and, they draw 2-2. So it's just not been a great time, I think, for Andoni Iraola in the last month, and they really need to get back on track. But Brentford, away from home, as we've all seen, are flying. Unbeaten in 5, 4 wins in that time as well, 4 wins in a row, and they've won in some pretty tricky places, winning at West Ham, winning at Palace, and I think the form guide of both teams probably suggests a draw, and I think if I was using my head on this one, I'd probably be going for the draw, but I'm going to stick with my second team, effectively. I'm going to go with Bournemouth to win here. I'm going to go for a narrow Bournemouth win, so I'm going to go Bournemouth 2, Brentford 1. Let me know in the comments what you think. On to Sunday's games, and first up it's Arsenal against Chelsea at the Emirates Stadium. A few months ago I was looking at the fixture list. As a Liverpool fan, I was looking to see what hurdles Arsenal might have to overcome in the title race, and I earmarked this fixture as one that might be really decisive in the title race, but actually as the season's taken shape, it's become more important to Chelsea than it has for Arsenal, hasn't it? I think even the most optimistic Arsenal fans would concede that the Premier League title is probably heading to Anfield in May. I mean, Arsenal can't afford to be too complacent. They are only 8 points clear of Newcastle in 6th, and if they do take their eye off the ball and switch their focus to Europe, as they might be tempted to do, then they might find themselves dragged back into a race for Champions League football next year. So I think they're going to have to stay focused, stay professional for this one, but I think it's fair to say that with that cushion that Arsenal have, this one probably takes on greater importance for Chelsea. In fact, every game going forward now takes on greater significance for Chelsea because they can't afford to not qualify for the Champions League, especially with the financial outlays that they've made over the last couple of years. They need that Champions League money coming in. And because it's so tight in that part of the table, 6 or 7 points separating 6 or 7 teams in that race for Europe, I think Chelsea have to come here and get something. If they were to get beat here and results elsewhere don't go their way, then those teams all start to bunch together and it becomes a lot more difficult for Chelsea, especially when you look at the fixture list between now and the end of the season. I'll put it up on screen. And again, I'm going to have to sit on the fence, I think. I wasn't that impressed with Arsenal away at Old Trafford, and equally, I wasn't that impressed with Chelsea at home to Leicester, but I think both of these teams, they've got something to fight for. Chelsea probably more so than Arsenal. I can't call it either way. So I'm going to go for Arsenal 1, Chelsea 1. Let me know in the comments what you think. On to another of Sunday's 1:30pm kickoffs. It's Fulham against Spurs at Craven Cottage. Marco Silva and those Fulham players will have been devastated after losing to Brighton with the last kick of the game last week, and I feel really sorry for them because looking at the table, they can only look at Brighton and say, that could have been us. That's how tight things are. Fulham find themselves 10th in the table, but actually it's still so tight. They've still got European ambitions, rightly so, and they come into this one, I think, if they get the right result against Spurs, who, by the way, at time of recording, we don't know what's happened with Spurs in the Europa League against AZ Alkmaar. Spurs may be on the floor too. Spurs' season could well be over by this point. And if that does prove to be the case, and by the time you've seen this video you already know, have Spurs gone out of the Europa League? If they have, then I think I'd be changing this prediction to a Fulham home win. Because I think momentum plays a really big part in football, and Spurs, with nothing to play for between now and the end of the season, the pressure will have really cranked up on Ange Postecoglou. On the flip side, if they've gone through, if they've turned that tie round, then they'll come into this game with real positivity. And as hard as it is to win at Craven Cottage, as hard as it is to get anything at Craven Cottage, I think a buoyant Spurs up against it with so many injuries could get a point at Craven Cottage. And I think that's what I'm going to go for, because I do think they're going to turn it round in midweek. Spurs haven't been very good on the road this season, apart from the win away at Ipswich last time out and the win at Brentford not long before that. They've lost at Liverpool and Arsenal, which is no bad thing. They lost at Forest too. They lost at Bournemouth. They also lost at Everton. They lost at Villa. They've just not been particularly good on the road, but I think they could come to Fulham and get something, assuming they do alright in midweek. If they don't, I think I would absolutely be going for a Fulham win. So it's difficult. I've got to kind of put my fingers in the drawer without knowing the result in midweek. So I'm going to go for Fulham 2, Spurs 2, Desmond again. Let me know in the comments what you think. On to Sunday's later kickoff, 7pm after the Carabao Cup Final, of course. It's Leicester City against Manchester United at the Walkers Stadium. I'm not talking about Ruud van Nistelrooy again. I'm just not even mentioning his name after this mention now. I've done it in the last 3, 4, 5 videos. I have absolutely no idea why Leicester haven't already made the decision. They might have still had a chance to stay up. They might even, if they made the decision right now and brought someone like a Sean Dyche in. I'm not going through all that again. Ruud van Nistelrooy is going to take Leicester down, and I can't see anything other than a Manchester United win here, even though Manchester United have been utterly terrible all season. And, I thought they were much better against Arsenal, and that's probably the only reason I'm backing them as well. But Leicester have been woeful, dreadful, worse than Southampton, I would say. Their performances have been horrendous, and I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel unless things change. Don't see anything that might encourage performances or encourage me to give a different prediction. It's an incredibly easy one to make, this one. I think Manchester United go there, and again, we don't know what happens in midweek. There's a part of me that thinks Man United go out against Real Sociedad on Thursday. That'll be a really interesting one. But, again, the score. By the time this is published, if Man United have gone through. I think even if they do go out in midweek, I think they'll bounce back here. I think they'll bounce back, and I will be going for a Manchester United win. And if they do go through in midweek, then all the more reason. They'll come into this one bouncing, ready to come in and keep that form going. And Ruben Amorim will know about momentum and the impact that has on not just player morale, but fans and everything, the feel-good factor around the club. That they've got to get that going at Manchester United, and it's so absent in both of these clubs at the moment. I mean, I know they've had the big stadium announcement in midweek. There's been a lot of question marks over that, but I can't see past a Manchester United win. I'm sorry, Leicester fans, I know, and I think we're on the same page. Spoke to a lot of Leicester fans after my prediction video last week, where I was a lot stronger on Ruud van Nistelrooy, and you tend to agree. I think those Leicester City fans telling me we were better under Steve Cooper. There's been protests at the games from the Leicester City fans. It doesn't need to be said by me. So, look, we'll see what happens. But I'm going to go for a Manchester United win. A very narrow one, admittedly, because I think both teams struggle up top. So I'm going to go for Leicester City 0, Manchester United 1. But let me know what you think. I guess both of these sides are pretty awful in defence as well, so it could just as easily be 5-4. But let me know what you think. Either way, we'll see. That is that for my prediction show this week. And thanks so much for watching. It makes a massive difference if you can like the video, if you can comment and share and subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help. You can find all the links to my other socials on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, on X. They're all in the description below. I post videos every single day on Premier League content, not just Liverpool, even though I am a Liverpool fan. I post content every single day, and if you like that sort of stuff, please give us a like and a subscribe. Either way, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.